We love a good mock draft here at Fantasy Football Today, and we've done a lot of them so far this offseason. What have we learned? What did you learn? That's an Office reference. Right now on FFT Express. Very good Office reference, by the way. Jamie's never seen The Office?
Nope.
Oh.
Not in full.
Okay.
I've seen episodes, like parts of
What a
it.
gift. You know, when you meet those people who have never seen Game of Thrones and you say, wow, the minute that you decide to finally watch, you're just going to enjoy life in a way you didn't even know you could enjoy before. That's like what you have with The Office at some point.
Let's make a deal. Yeah. You'll watch The Sopranos this summer, and I'll watch The Office.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I mean, that seems like a win-win.
Okay.
Speaking of winning, how are we going to win our fantasy drafts? What have you learned from our off-season mocks?
I guess I'll start with the biggest thing that stands out to me is that how quickly the top tier wide receivers go and how the running back pool is still relatively deep once we get to the middle of the draft. And I find myself doing this a lot in our drafts and having to sort of remind myself that this may be the norm once we get to August and start doing, some drafts for real or the mock drafts ramp up. In that, like, you can get to the middle of, rounds 7, 8, 9, 10 in that range and still get some really good flex options at running back. And if you don't love, like, I like to come out of my first 7, 8 rounds with 4 receivers that I can start 3 receiver league in a flex and have no issues. And I find myself like, oh, I don't really love my 4th receiver at that point. Now, you don't have to draft like that if you don't want to, but once we get to that range of receivers, it's like, do I really want Cedric Tillman here? Like I don't want to do that until round 10 plus. And that's the range of guys, at least in my rankings, that I'm sort of reaching for. So I find that you can get better value at running back in the middle rounds than you can at receiver right now.
I think it's going hand in hand with that is all we heard going into the NFL draft was this is a great running back class, not a great wide receiver class. And last year we heard basically the exact opposite, right? It was a great wide receiver class and a pretty bad running back class. Played out that way. You had Bucky Irving, but it played out that way for the most part. And the wide receivers were really good. And those are guys that you wanted to draft in retrospect. This year, with it being the opposite, it just feels like those rookie running backs have made the position even deeper and even better to get potential starters in round 5, maybe. And they didn't really hurt running backs that we were super excited about drafting, which it's just everything was a win-win and makes the running back position so much
even those guys that you say we didn't hurt the ones that we were excited about drafting, I still think you can get good production and great value from Ramondre Stevenson in tandem with Travion Henderson, from Rachaad White. This is not a rookie, but Rachaad White, who's getting really pushed down and still going to have, I think, enough of a role that can help you. Jaylen Warren, who's, I think still going to have a very prominent role in Pittsburgh. There's still a lot of great scenarios here for some of these guys that got quote unquote ruined by these rookies. Even Najee Harris potentially could still be a very, prominent factor for the Chargers. So it's again allowed this range of running backs to still be good potential flex options or good reserves. Whereas, how soon do you want to take, for example, Trey Harris or Jack Bech or some of these other rookie wide receivers that have potential, but you may have to reach for them a little bit sooner than you want to.
All right, quick break, and we'll talk about another position that's very deep after this. You got to talk about quarterback. I mean, as we do these mock drafts, just you don't have to wait for a quarterback, but it's certainly a viable option. It is every year, but this year feels even deeper than most years.
There's I think, I don't want to limit it to a certain number, but there's 4 or 5 guys that stand out to me that I'm going to draft a lot of, and potentially 2. And I don't love to draft 2 quarterbacks, but I think it makes sense with this range. So Dak Prescott, Caleb Williams, Justin Fields, Drake May, and Trevor Lawrence. These are going to be 5 quarterbacks that I want to have a lot of shares of. And I didn't bring this up. You kind of, jumped ahead quickly, but we were talking about Baker Mayfield and his regression. And I was going to say one thing that I love about the Baker Mayfield conversation and how well he performed last year is how excited I am about Trevor Lawrence this year. And so that offense is now in Jacksonville, where they added a really significant piece in Travis Hunter. They have one of the more dynamic receivers that we saw coming off of last year in Brian Thomas. And we know Trevor Lawrence has struggled. Well, this may be the opportunity for Trevor Lawrence to take a step forward. And I also think there's going to be, excuse me, a trickle down effect to two players when we could transition tight end after this, but transition down to two players is Diami Brown and Brenton Strange, because they're a really thin group if you think about it. You know, those two guys at the top, I think, are going to be really good. But can Brown make some plays similar to what maybe we saw some flashes with Jalen McMillan last year in Tampa and K. Dotton? And I know a lot of it was injury related for those guys, but you know, if this is a more multifaceted, you know, sort of offense, and it's not just the two receivers at the top, which I think that's going to be the case, but I just don't know. But I think you want to get maybe late round flyers on some of these guys, you know. So if you are looking at a second tight end in a deeper league, if you are looking at a really deep draft, you know, Strange and Diami Brown could have some big options. But just in terms of the quarterback, like, it's always deep. We know this.
Yeah.
You're going to get the guys at the top hopefully perform the way that they should, but you know, once you get past, you know, in the group we talked about, Baker Mayfield, Bo Nix, Mahomes, Mayfield, Nix, you know, 6, 7, 8. Like, I think the guys that I mentioned, you know, Caleb Williams and May and Lawrence and Pratt and Dak, and throw in Brock Purdy and still Jared Goff, and it's just, there's so many potential ways you can build your team and still get great quarterback play.
And you know, the way you talked about Ramondre Stevenson and Jalen Warren and Rashad White is how I feel about a guy like Tua Tagovailoa.
Yep.
Who may not even get drafted. Like, I'm looking at this draft we did recently, and in May. So I don't know when people are listening to this, but it's probably still May. But just a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, he didn't even get drafted in a 6-point per passing touchdown league. He's a guy that 2 years ago led the NFL in passing yards. So there, and Stafford, like, if Stafford has Devontae Adams is good, Stafford's going to be worth using. Just
JJ McCarthy,
yeah,
Geno Smith, you know, they're going to, they're in situations where you could see a lot of production. Look, Sam Darnold, if he's still as good as he was, who knows? You know, I mean, I don't buy it, but it's just so deep, the position. Michael Penix, look, last time we saw his offense, did you know? I know a lot of it wasn't him, but did you know that in his 3 starts, they averaged the Falcons 32 points per game?
Wow. That's awesome. They've
And
got
Bryce Young.
explosive
Think how
players.
good Bryce Young was to close the season. They just got a first-round talent.
So last thing here is, what have you learned about tight end so far?
This is such an interesting position, because you know the first two guys are going to go in probably the first 30 overall picks, let's just say. You know, so by the time we get to the middle of round 3, you're not going to see Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. When do you pull the trigger on George Kittle? I think that's, you know, he's sort of in that mix of still great wide receivers and some really good running backs. So how early do you want to go for him? When do you want to buy back into Sam Laporta? You know, he's been Dave and I did express last week, I believe, and you couldn't do it. So, or maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was who are we drafting a lot of? And I tend to draft a lot of Sam Laporta in these early drafts just because of where he's been falling. It's really after you get past like Laporta, Njoku, Kelsey, that group of tight ends, like who do you trust, and when do you want to, you know, take a chance on those guys? So Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren and Tucker Kraft, and I still think Dalton Kincaid, you know, has some bounce back potential. Jonnu Smith, you know, where does he, you know, sort of come into play? So great or late, the phrase that we've sort of, you know, adopted here and I think made popular because they use it at Fantasy Pros now too.
Do they really?
I mean, at least when we come on, they mention it, and it just makes so much sense. Like, if you can't get one of the top tier guys, there's such a deep pool of potential options here.
Yeah.
That they're not all going to hit clearly. But do you know that Kyle Pitts in the first 6 weeks of the season was averaging 10 PPR points per game?
Yeah, well, he had a 4-game stretch where he was awesome.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't really do it for me.
I don't disagree with you at all, but you know, contract year, and maybe Penix leans on him a little bit more.
Maybe.
You know, there are things that you could see with a lot of different players at this position. Like, think about some of the younger tight ends, not just the two rookies. Like Gunnar Helm could be the guy in Tennessee. Terrace Ferguson could be the guy for the Rams. Obviously, Mason Taylor could be the guy for the Jets. Like, there's a lot of different paths. Evan Ingram still, I think, could be really good. Every first team, every stop he's made the first year, including his rookie season with the Giants, has been good.
I actually really like drafting Evan Ingram.
Same.
It's one of my favorite late round picks. I'm having a hard time deciding. My big question with tight end is, what's a better value? McBride or Bowers in round 2 or George Kittle in round what? I mean, if it's 5, it's probably Kittle. If it's 4, it's probably the other 2. That's kind of where I'm at. If I'm
I
going,
think you want a 3-round difference.
yeah, right. You do. You want it, but I do remember drafting Kittle in round 4 in one draft and not hating it. He's got he was number 1 per game last year.
And I don't know how you feel about this. Would not shock me at all if he's won again. Like, just,
No.
we're putting a lot on Juwan Jennings and
Yeah.
Ricky Pearsall and an injured Brandon Ayuk when George Kittle's been so good.
And I know he's not going to have as many targets as McBride and Bowers, but the no one ever does on the 49ers, but they're always, in terms of yards per target, they're always bonkers, right? They're so good. They're the most efficient team. So it is just like he's not old. He's, he feels like he's kind of old, but he's not. He's at an age where he can still produce at a high level. And he was the number 1 tight end in fantasy last year on a per game basis.
Can you make a case? It's probably not the best case because of where he gets drafted, but is he the most underrated player in fantasy?
Yeah.
He's in the conversation.
It's a great, yeah. This feels like a show topic. It does. It really does.
Yeah.
It's just, I think people feel like he's old. Because.
And injury prone. I think a lot of people think he's injury prone.
Yeah. Ayuk, very possibly going to start the year on PUP. Debo traded, and we're not loving George Kittle. It's because he's older than McBride and Bowers, I think, and yes, injury prone. Okay. All right, Jamey, thank you very much. And we'll talk to you next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. This is FFT Express. See you soon.